In this video, we're going to take a look at the different properties that we use to describe matter. So properties are things that we use to describe matter, and we need to describe matter when we're doing labs, especially because we need to see what happens if there's a change to that matter over time. Is there a chemical change, a physical change that happens? So we have to make observations. We have to describe what do our reactants look like at the start, what do our chemicals look like at the beginning, what do they look like at the end as well. And then we can describe and give and essentially give characteristics to the matter that we're studying. We want to know a little bit about them. So there's two main types of properties that you can see. You might see what's called a chemical property, and then you might also see a physical property. And these are simply ways to, again, describe matter, to describe it, to give it characteristics. Okay. So you might have a favorite shirt, and you might say, well, it's red. It's solid. Okay, those are all examples of properties that you can use. It's smooth, so that you're describing your shirt. You're giving it characteristics. You're telling me its color. You're telling me its state. You're telling me its texture, for example. So just like we do with our objects in everyday life, we want to describe our chemicals. So for physical properties, those are properties that describe matter without having to change it chemically in any way. It's things like just you're looking at the substance and you're saying, you know what, this is the color of the substance. You might also tell me if it dissolves or not. So solubility, that's actually a physical property. Does it dissolve or not? Because you don't change the substance to describe it. You might have to put it in water to test it out to see if it will dissolve, but it doesn't change what the substance actually is. So a physical property is a property that describes matter without having to change what it is in any way. You might describe it in terms of its density. That's an example of a physical property as well. You might just say what it smells like. That's an example of a physical property, the odor. You might say what it tastes like. That's an example of a physical property as well, the taste. Other physical properties you might see is something called the luster. So if you ever have, let's say, gold or jewelry around, it's lustrous. It could be shiny. That's an example of a physical property. So is it lustrous, which means shiny? So lustrous. Or is it the opposite of shiny? You might say is dull. So is it lustrous or is it dull? So we have lustrous and dull. You could describe the texture, for example. The texture, is it smooth or rough, for example? You could describe the state. Is it solid, liquid, or gas? Because you're not changing what the substance is. You're just describing the state, solid, liquid, or gas. Is it a conductor or insulator? So conductivity. Conductivity is actually a physical property as well. A lot of students make the mistake in thinking it's a chemical property. That's actually a physical property. So color, solubility, density, odor, taste, luster, texture, state, conductivity. Those are all some common examples that you might see of physical properties because they don't change what the substance is when you describe it. Now, chemical properties, on the other hand, they essentially describe how the matter you're studying reacts. It describes what it does when it changes into something new. So usually you're basically saying, what does it react with? That's what you're sort of trying to say. What does it react with? You might say, for example, that it burns in the presence of oxygen. So you might describe its combustibility. It's combustible. Combustibility. You might describe that it reacts with acids. So it reacts with acids. You might say it reacts with water. Reacts with water. And when I say reacts with water, reacts with acid, it forms new chemicals when you make them react with acids or when you make them combine with water. It doesn't just dissolve. It actually forms new chemicals. So chemical properties really describe how the matter reacts when it changes. So what does it react with? Is it combustible? Does it react with oxygen? Does it react with acids? Does it react with water, for example? Is it Is it sensitive to light? Does it break down? So sensitive to light. Does it break down when you expose it to light, chemically speaking? So those are all examples of some chemical properties that you can use to describe matter. So let's say we look at this here. I'm going to draw this out. This is a piece of magnesium. This is a piece of magnesium, Mg. Now, this piece of magnesium, if you were in the lab, you could describe it with physical properties. You could say its color. Now, you don't see it here, but if you Google a piece of magnesium, you'd see that its color is, well, a silver color. You would see that at room temperature, it is a solid. At room temperature, it's a solid. Now, you could test it out, but this is a metal. Magnesium is a metal, so it conducts electricity. It's a conductor. Conductor. Okay. And then you might, another thing you might sometimes see, and I didn't really write this out yet, but you might also have the term malleability. Malleability. Can you pound it into sheets without breaking it? Is it malleable? Malleable. And so malleability, malleable, is another physical property you could use to describe substances. And so magnesium, you can actually pound it into sheets without breaking it. So it is malleable, malleable as well. One more I forgot to add earlier was the term ductile, ductility. Can you stretch it into a wire without breaking it? And if you can, that's called ductile. The opposite of malleable, like if you pound it and it breaks and shatters, that would be called brittle. So the opposite of malleable would be brittle, like a glass. When you drop it, it shatters. So it's brittle, or chalk, it's brittle. Malleable, so I should say chalk is a good example. It's brittle. When you drop it, it shatters into a whole bunch of pieces. But anyways, here we describe magnesium as being silver, solid, conductor, and malleable. You could describe its odor maybe. If there's no odor, it's odorless. You wouldn't want to taste it. If you look at it under the light, you could see if it's shiny or not. So if there's a bit of shine to it, you might say it's lustrous, for example. If you have some fresh magnesium there. Those are all physical properties. But you could also describe this chemically speaking. What does it react with? How does it react with other chemicals? And so if you were to describe this chemically, it actually does react with acids. It reacts with acids. And if you test this out in the lab as well, you'll find that magnesium does react with oxygen. You might have seen a demo with that where it makes a really bright light, but magnesium is combustible. Magnesium reacts with oxygen, so we'll say it's combustible. It'll burn in the presence of oxygen. It actually makes a nice bright light. So reacts with acids, is combustible, and you can test other things out, but those are some chemical properties that you can use. So in this video, we saw that properties are used to describe matter. And we want to describe matter when we do reactions in labs and want to give them characteristics. So we can describe matter using physical properties, which don't need to change what the matter is. You just kind of make your observations and it doesn't change what the matter is. It's just when the matter is doing its own thing, not changing any way, not reacting, what are some characteristics it may have? And we listed a bunch over here. And then we saw chemical properties, which describes how the matter reacts with other substances or behaves on a chemical level. And that could be things like combustibility with oxygen, reacting with acids, water, how it reacts to light. And we saw an example with magnesium over here. So you should be able to identify and describe properties of matter, chemical and physical.